And welcome. It's Ari Rosenbaum here with that 401k virtual bunch, special guest and a good friend of mine. I feel like there's a scene on the Tonight Show when Don Rickles comes out and Frank Sinatra's there, and he says, "You know what? People swear that I know Frank Sinatra, and this is the first time we met, but I keep on telling people over the last few years that I know you, so you can verify that." Congressman Raskin from, Democrat from Maryland.
Well, Ari, you were my prize pupil, so
That's not. First of all, that's not true. Um, I was never a student of yours, but
you're a teacher's pet nonetheless. I
so
got to know you well in law school, and I've always admired your iconoclasm and your intellectual firepower and your willingness to stand up for what you believe in, and you're a good guy.
so that's the first question. What kind? So my audience tends to be people who actually follow me on Twitter and LinkedIn and all that stuff and read my articles. So honestly, what kind of a pain in the rear end was I during law school as an associate dean?
Well, the young people are extremely idealistic, and God bless them, and we need them to hold us to account for what we say, because there's obviously a gap between our self-proclaimed ideals and how institutions actually run. And you were somebody who always wanted to close that gap and make sure that our law school was living up to its proclaimed values. So that's good.
So speaking of law school, how did you go from constitutional law professor, associate dean, and get into politics? Because I mean, I know that you were politically involved, obviously through your father, actually through both of your parents, and you were involved with Jesse Jackson back in the day. But how did that finally develop where you're like, you know what, let me go in and start? And what was it, the Maryland Senate? Is that how you started?
Yeah, well, so I guess it was always kind of in my blood. My grandfather was the first Jewish person ever elected to the Minnesota state legislature. And he was a lawyer, but he had a very productive, interesting career in the Democratic Farm Labor Party in Minnesota. So it was, there are actually a lot of politicians in different places in my family background. But I decided to run because one day I picked up the paper and I saw that my state senator had introduced a pro-Iraq war resolution and had introduced a bill to dramatically expand the death penalty in Maryland. And I said, that's weird. And I did some more research and I said, you know what, I'm going to run because we have a part-time legislature and I wouldn't have to choose between teaching and being in the General Assembly. And everybody said, that's crazy. You can't beat a 32-year incumbent who's president pro tem of the Senate. And I said, why not? And they said, because you can't beat the machine. And I'd say, well, who's the machine? And they named 3 or 4 people. And I said, all right, well, there's 175,000 people in our district. Those will be the last 4 people I go talk to. I'll go talk to the machine when it's all over. So my favorite story, Ari, about the campaign is when I first ran, the Post had an article saying, Raskin's chances of victory are considered impossible. They quoted a pundit. And then 9 months later, we got 67% of the vote. And they quoted another pundit who said Raskin's victory was inevitable. So we went from impossible to inevitable in 9 months because the pundits are never wrong. So I like to tell the young people that in politics, nothing's impossible, nothing's inevitable. It's only possible through the democratic arts of education and organizing and mobilizing people for change.
And then the congressional seat opened up because Chris
Van Hollen,
yeah, Van Hollen ran for the Senate because that was an open seat, and then that opened up, I guess, for you. And how was that going from Senate campaign to running for the House?
Well, I wanted to run because I was the majority whip of the Maryland Senate. We'd been getting all kinds of incredible stuff done, at least from my perspective. I'm not sure from yours, but marriage equality and we abolished the death penalty and we increased the minimum wage and stuff and a lot of good environmental stuff. So yeah, when Chris Van Hollen called me up and he said, I'm going to run for Senate, will you support me? I said, Chris, not only will I support you, I'll run for your seat. And I just knew immediately I wanted to do it. Turned out to be the most expensive primary race in the history of the United States because one of the guys I ran against was a billionaire, David Trone, who now serves with me in Congress. He ran the next time around 2 years later in the neighboring district, and
Isn't
he
David
won.
Trone the total wine and beer guy?
You got it. He's the CEO. I ran against him, and I also ran against Kathleen Matthews, who's married to Chris Matthews, the
Oh,
hardball.
yes.
So, and then there were 5 other candidates. There was something more than like $20 million spent. It was a ridiculous amount of money, but we spent around $1 million. But I had, I based my campaign around young people, and it was called Democracy Summer. And we invited all the high school and college kids who wanted to come and learn about politics and government to come be involved in the campaign. So I've continued to do Democracy Summer in all my campaigns, and it's actually going nationwide this summer through the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee.
Yeah, one thing that what I feel like when we used to talk, and I used to, I was always right of center, maybe less right than I used to be, and you're you, as they say. We always had respect, and sometimes I would joke about some of your views. I don't want to get, but what has happened? So I have a friend of mine who was Ted Cruz's spokesperson. So we had this event in January because he couldn't attend because of, the impeachment. And I remember sending out an email, oh, Ted Cruz's former spokesperson, and somebody writes back, I won't attend this event. Ted Cruz is going to be here. And I'm like, Ted Cruz is not going to be here. His spokesperson is. And I actually sent out an email last week.
Ted Cruz was going to be in Cancun, right?
Yeah. Ted Cruz, I think, was at Cancun around that time. It was late January. But I sent out an email about you last week. And I said, he couldn't speak at my event in January because he had this little thing called impeachment. And, he was the impeachment manager on this. And someone says, that was a waste of time. You shouldn't mention the impeachment. What has happened where in politics, to me, politics has turned into professional wrestling where, because you're on the other side, I don't like you anymore. You're wrong. You're bad. I mean, it's, I'm still, I'm not a fan of Nancy Pelosi's, but I don't think Nancy Pelosi's an evil person. I don't think that Nancy Pelosi's a drunk or this. What has happened to politics? Is it social media that did this? Because it wasn't always the case. I mean, I remember when Clinton ran against Bush, it's economy stupid. And then it got when Clinton was in office, was all the conspiracy theories, how he bumped off Vince Foster and all that stuff.
Right.
But what has happened to politics where it's gone off the rails and I can no longer agree with you? And because you're on the opposite sides, we can't get along. I look at, Justice Ginsburg, and obviously that's somebody that you would admire. And there was Justice Scalia, and they were great friends. And what has happened to that? And is that something that could come back? Because I mean, when I see you in Congress, I don't see you as somebody who's not wanting to get along with people.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a middle child. So like, I like bringing people together and try to see the points of view from different perspectives and everything. And that's what's fun about politics. I mean, if you want to go into politics to hate people, you really shouldn't be in politics, I mean, we shouldn't overstate and overly romanticize the past. I mean, if you go back and you look at some of the stuff that was going on, between Jefferson and Adams, and those guys were friends, but there was a period where they were saying really hostile things about each other, and Tom Paine and George Washington. So, I mean, democracy is a rough and tumble thing, and people say stuff. But I think you're fundamentally right that it's gotten much more tribalistic, much more mean. And, the social media has amplified not just sarcasm and snarkiness and all that kind of stuff, but real sadistic, mean stuff. I mean, and we saw what happened on January 6th. I mean, that was violence of Americans against Americans.
In January 6th, and let's go back to that. So again, I'll come clean here with my politics. I'm a never Trumper. I'm Republican, and I will continue to be Republican, and hopefully they'll get their sanity back. But this isn't to placate.
And you're a New Yorker too.
Yeah. So listen, I'm always the odd fit. This is what happens. I'm a Mets fan too, so that's what happens also. But the insurrection, I think everybody poos it. And as somebody who was there, were you terrified when you were? I mean, what was it like as somebody who was actually there instead of somebody who was tweeting that they were actually there? What was it like?
My situation's pretty idiosyncratic, all right? Because remember, we had lost my son exactly a week before, and we had buried him the day before.
Right.
So I was kind of in a daze as it was. And my youngest daughter came with me that that day. She didn't want us to be away from each other.
Sure.
And my other daughter's husband came with me. So the truth was, I felt then, I probably still feel now, I don't care what, any Confederate flag bearing fascist insurrectionist says or does. There's nothing that they could do to me that's worse than what I've already been through.
Right.
So I was not personally afraid. I think I otherwise would have been. I was very concerned about where Tabitha and Hank were. At that point, they were hiding under a desk in Steny Hoyer's office, and the door was locked and barricaded. My chief of staff was in there with them, and she found a fire pick in the fireplace that she was wielding over the door. But the mob had gotten in, and they were banging on the doors and yelling, "Hang Mike Pence, hang Mike Pence," and "We want Trump," and and "Where's Nancy?" So it was an objectively scary, terrifying scene. And 5 people died that day, and I have a lot of constituents who are cops, because my district is right outside of DC in Montgomery County, Frederick County, Carroll County, Maryland, and they describe it as medieval warfare. I mean, it was just these waves of people coming in with hockey sticks, baseball bats, Confederate battle flags, Trump flags, hitting people over the head, spearing them. One officer had a heart attack, others passed out, somebody got his eye gouged, one officer lost 3 fingers, 145 people ended up wounded and hospitalized. So it was pretty serious business.
So we know that I remember when I was at law school, you were representing Perot for that debates when they,
Yes.
but you were working. More important issues now was this is a question from Mira Edelman. Mira Veda, who graduated with me. So
yeah,
she's in the audience.
Thank you.
I saw her in Denver. I had an event in Denver, so I invited her to a game. But she asks a question. Can you talk a bit about how you and the managers and staff work together to put together such compelling audio and visual evidence to tell the story of what happened during the trial?
Well, we were lucky that Donald Trump had total instability in his legal team, and they kept asking for continuances, and we pretended that we were really discomfited by it. But in fact, every time they asked to delay it more, it gave us the chance to do precisely what she's talking about, which was to coordinate the video images with our development of a story. And I'd gone back and I looked at what happened in impeachment 1, and I thought that they did a great job, except one thing. It was like each impeachment manager was getting up and making a speech, like to stand on its own. And I said, we're not going to do that. We're going to tell one story where each of us is going to pass the baton to the next person. It'll be chapters of how this unfolded, from Trump's getting people ready for the big lie, to losing the election, then to trying to undermine it in different ways, going to the Pennsylvania legislature, trying to convince them to nullify the popular vote and replace it with Trump electors, going to Secretary of State Raffensperger in Georgia and trying to get him to commit election fraud by finding 11,781 votes. And then finally, just summoning the mob, going out to the Proud Boys, the 3%ers, the Oath Keepers, and Trump Nation to get them to come in, and then revving them up into a frenzy and unleashing them on the Capitol. And so when you see it in that context, and then you watch what happened, there's no doubt this is not a case of mistaken identity. It's perfectly clear who did it. It's not exactly like an Agatha Christie novel, And I think that 10 Republicans in the House, of course, joined us. They upheld their constitutional oath to defend the Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic, and 7 Republicans in the Senate joined all of the Democrats in voting to convict. So it was the most bipartisan and bicameral vote in American history. There have only been 4 trials, right? There's Andrew Johnson, There's Bill Clinton, Trump 1 and Trump 2, and this was by far the most bipartisan statement of the guilt of a president, although he did beat the constitutional spread. We didn't make it to 67, we got to 57.
I mean, that's one of the things people see it's a waste of time. They weren't going to get the 67, but as somebody who was there that day during the insurrection, what do you say to those people who say it was a waste of time and a waste of money because you were never going to get 67 votes?
I mean, if we believe in the Constitution and defending the democracy, and we want to have people participate nonviolently in democracy, and if we think that the historical record or the accuracy of the historical record is important, then we had no choice. We convicted him in the court of public opinion. We convicted him in the eyes of history. I think already Donald Trump is making claims like my followers who entered the building were hugging and kissing the Capitol officers. And I have Republican colleagues in Congress who are making it sound like it was a reenactment of Dr. King's March on Washington in 1963, that it was some kind of Quaker nonviolent gathering or something.
Bar review every Thursday night we used to have.
There we go. So, we have in this age of fake news and propaganda and constant lying, we put out a scrupulously documented record of what happened. That is there for all of American history. I believe Donald Trump is a pariah in the national political culture, even though terrifyingly, he has only tightened his stranglehold over the Republican Party. And I think that they've got to ask themselves the question that Liz Cheney is posing right now, which is, are we going to basically position ourselves outside of the constitutional order and attack the Constitution and attack elections and the government, or are we going to be a party that participates? I mean, it's a profound question. There's a difference between a political party and a religious cult, but the Republican Party is acting like that. Whatever Trump says goes. Whatever he says is like chapter and verse. Right.
Which is again why I outed myself as a never Trumper, but that's life. What do you see? You're barely you're in the majority, but without that much majority. There's talk of tax increases. How is it able to muster? Well, first of all, are you in favor of the elimination of the filibuster in the Senate? As somebody,
yeah, I am, and I'll tell you why. I mean, I never was for the filibuster. I think it's in profound tension with constitutional values. I mean, our constitutional values are rights of the minority and individuals in the Bill of Rights, but majority rule. I mean, when the Supreme Court votes, it's a majority rule. It's 5-4. There's millions of 5-4 decisions, as you know, from law school, Ari. And that's the default rule for the House and the Senate, unless there's a constitutional provision that says 2/3 to override or 2/3 for treaty or what have you. So they basically made it 3/5 by saying you got to get 60 votes to invoke cloture against a filibuster. And I mean, we just passed a bill for universal background check for violent criminals in purchasing firearms. Okay, it's supported by 95% of the American people. Vast majority of Democrats, Republicans, independents, everybody says, yeah, people have a right to self-defense with a gun. People have a right to recreation and hunt with a gun, but you don't have a right to get it if you are a convicted violent criminal, a fugitive, an undocumented person, a person who's violently unstable, all that stuff. And everybody agrees, yeah, let's close that internet loophole. Let's close the private gun show loophole. Let's close the private, transfer loophole. But there's no way we're going to be able to get to 60 votes in the Senate. And that's true for so many things that we've sent over there. So I do support.
Speaking of constitutional law, what about increasing the court?
Sorry?
Increasing the Supreme Court. A lot of
it's funny. There are a bunch of bills on that, and you can go and look at those bills. Sure. You're not going to find my name on it. It's not. I mean, I understand that we've changed the size of the Supreme Court multiple times in American history. It's not fixed in the Constitution, so I'm not opposed to it. But to me, it's not the kind of thing that you just one day say, yeah, let's add 2 justices, or let's add 4 justices. We've got to put some thought into that. And I agree with what the president has done. And by the way, I think Biden's doing a fantastic job as president. But he said, let's set up a commission and let's really analyze this. And I support that commission.
Right, because my concern is that every 2 years, or there's a switch from majority to minority, the majority now is going to add more, and then all of a sudden you're going to have 70 Supreme Court justices.
But I think that's right. Yeah. We'll keep, it'll be like an accordion, it's getting bigger or smaller depending on what works for people. But
the last question, because I don't want to keep you because we got 4 minutes, but what do you see the agenda in the next 2 years? Well, it's less than a year.
Yeah, this is what I wanted to say. I think that a high burden of hope rested on Joe Biden and his administration because, against the background of the catastrophic mishandling of COVID-19, the loss of hundreds of thousands of people, and all the dysfunction in government, he needed to show that we could make government work for the people again in democracy. The government can be a legitimate instrument of the common good and not just an instrument of private self-enrichment of the president and his cronies and his family. And we've been doing that with the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Act to replenish the state and county coffers, to get the vaccine in people's arms, to bolster the public health infrastructure, to get the kids back to school safely, and so on. And now we're doing the American Families Act because one of the fault lines that was exposed by COVID-19 was the difficulty that young families have trying to do their work, do their jobs, run their businesses, and also manage childcare and daycare for little kids. And so there's like a huge investment in the child care and dependent care tax credit and the child tax credit. That's like a big deal for the middle class of the country. And then finally, the infrastructure plan, the American Jobs Act. These are going to be millions of jobs that cannot be outsourced because they're about American infrastructure. And I know, my GOP friends are on my case because the notion of what infrastructure is expanding. But if you go back and you look historically at Eisenhower and the highways, or Lincoln and the Transcontinental Railroad, and the land transfers for the colleges, and the notion of public infrastructure has always expanded. And there have always been complaints, what do highways have to do with public infrastructure? Infrastructure means bridges, and everybody has a frozen concept. But part of the infrastructure of the country is public health and making that work. And then also making it, the cybersecurity, making it work so that we can communicate to each other. So it won't surprise you to learn a more liberal concept of what infrastructure is. And Donald Trump probably could have cleaned our clock if he had decided to make a serious investment in the infrastructure, but he didn't. There was not a seriousness about government. And I feel like we got one party that's serious about government. We might make some mistakes here and there, but we're at least trying to serve the people. And another party that's great at trying to suppress the vote and win elections, but they don't really have a program. In fact, in 2020, that was the first time in American history that the Republican Party or any major party didn't have a platform. They basically said their platform was whatever Donald Trump said.
That's right. That's right. So I think we're out of time, but somebody did ask one last question: for or against term limits? I think that you're against.
I am very much for term limits.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
It's something new every day.
I'm a pariah in my party for that, but I think democracy is all about taking turns, and it's true, like, a lot of opponents of term limits like to say, well, I believe in natural term limits, elections. And it's true, you can kick people out. But with the seniority system, it becomes a much bigger deal to kick out an incumbent who's been in, now I did beat somebody who'd been in for 32 years when I first ran. But
it happen often.
Yeah, it doesn't happen too often. And I do think that we should take turns. We get term limits for president, and so that's something I would support, but we got to pass HR 1 to guarantee people's voting rights.
I don't want to keep you. I thank you for your time. And again, like I said, you mean so much to me. Maybe you didn't think about it, but like I said, I needed a friend way back when. Probably if I didn't meet you, who knows what I still would have been an attorney, but you inspire me every day. I'll disagree with you some of the time, but I think that what I like about you is I may disagree with you, but the decency and the always believing and trying to do the right thing. And that's something that politics has not changed you, and I don't think politics will ever change you.
Well, you're very kind, Ari. Stay close, man, and congratulations on all your success. I take a lot of pride in everything you do.
And congratulations on your success. You always make me proud every day.
All best to you and your friends out there. I'll
You
see you
got it.
soon.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.